Commander Zexathara had seen many things during his 40 cycles of service in the Galactic Combat Academy. He had witnessed the brutal strength of the Krillian warriors, watched the lightning-fast strikes of the Veltari assassins, and even observed the methodical precision of the mechanical synthetics. But nothing had prepared him for what stood before him now. The human was small, impossibly small. Even by human standards, she appeared to be what their species called a child. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple tail, and she wore the standard academy training uniform that seemed too large for her tiny frame. She couldn't have been more than 12 of their years old, and she barely reached the chest of most other cadets. "This must be some kind of mistake," muttered Sergeant Corval, a massive Bruthan whose scales rippled with barely contained skepticism. His 4 arms crossed over his chest as he stared down at the human girl. "The Academy doesn't accept younglings, especially not from species known for their physical limitations." The girl looked up at them with calm brown eyes, showing no sign of intimidation, despite being surrounded by beings that could crush her without effort. When she spoke, her voice was clear and steady. "My name is Maya Chen. I'm here for combat training." Zexathara felt his mandibles click in what passed for amusement among his people. The Galactic Combat Academy was the most elite training facility in known space. Warriors from hundreds of worlds competed for the chance to study here, learning techniques that had been perfected over millennia. The entrance requirements alone were enough to eliminate 90% of applicants before they even set foot on the station. "Child," Zexathara said, his voice carrying the patient tone he might use with a lost pet. "This academy trains the finest warriors in the galaxy. Our basic conditioning programs would break bones in creatures twice your size. Perhaps you should speak with the Civilian Education Department instead." Maya tilted her head slightly, and something flickered in her eyes. Not anger exactly, but something cooler and more dangerous. "I passed all the entrance requirements. Check your records." Corval's laugh was like grinding stone. "Impossible. The physical trials alone require lifting 3 times your own body weight, sustained combat for 6 hours, and survival in hostile environments that would kill most species in minutes." The girl remained silent, but her stance shifted almost imperceptibly. Zexathara had been around warriors long enough to recognize the subtle changes that preceded violence. The way her weight settled on the balls of her feet, the looseness in her shoulders, the slight angle of her hands. "Show us your documentation," he said, more to diffuse the situation than from any real belief that the records would support her claim. Maya reached into her jacket and withdrew a datapad. The holographic display that appeared when she activated it made Zexathara's primary eyes widen in shock. Every test score was not just passing, but exceptional. Strength trials, 310% of requirement. Endurance tests, completed in half the allotted time. Combat assessment, perfect scores across all categories. "These numbers," Corval said, his voice suddenly uncertain. "They must be fabricated. No being this size could achieve such results." The training hall fell silent except for the hum of artificial gravity and life support systems. Other cadets had begun to notice the commotion, creating a loose circle around the group. Zexathara saw representatives of a dozen species watching with interest, their various sensory organs focused on the small human. Maya closed the datapad and looked up at the towering instructors. "Would you like me to demonstrate?" Before anyone could respond, a new voice cut through the tension. "That won't be necessary." Master Theclon approached with the measured pace of someone accustomed to command. The ancient Zealish was one of the most respected instructors in the academy, his chitinous form bearing scars from 1,000 battles across the galaxy. Where he walked, cadets stepped aside with automatic respect. "Master Theclon," Zexathara said, inclining his head, "we were just discussing this human's..." placement in the program. The old master's compound eyes fixed on Maya, studying her with an intensity that had made countless warriors uncomfortable. But the girl met his gaze without flinching, her small chin raised slightly in what might have been defiance or simple confidence. "I have reviewed her files," Theclon said finally. "Her test results are genuine. More interesting than the numbers, however, is the manner in which she achieved them." His gaze swept over the assembled instructors. "Tell me, Sergeant Corval, how would you approach an opponent who possessed superior reach, strength, and armor?" The Bruthan's scales shifted color slightly, a sign of deep thought among his people. "Standard doctrine suggests using terrain to your advantage, or employing ranged weapons to avoid close combat." "Acceptable strategies," Theclon acknowledged. "Commander Zexthara, your people are known for their tactical acumen. What would your assessment be?" Zexthara considered carefully. "Analysis of opponent weaknesses would be crucial. Most heavily armored species sacrifice mobility for protection. Targeting joints, sensory organs, or other vulnerable points might provide opportunities. Also sound reasoning." Theclon's attention returned to Maya. "Young human, the strength trial requires lifting a weight equivalent to 3 times your body mass. The testing chamber recorded your actual achievement as considerably higher. Would you care to explain your methodology?" Maya was quiet for a moment, as if deciding how much to reveal. When she spoke, her words carried a matter-of-fact quality that somehow made them more disturbing. "The test weights use a standard grip design optimized for humanoid hands of average size. My hands are smaller, which actually provides better leverage at certain contact points. The lifting motion itself follows basic biomechanical principles. Most species try to use pure muscle strength, but proper technique can amplify force generation significantly." She paused, seeming to consider her audience. "Also, the psychological approach matters. Most cadets see the weight as an obstacle to overcome. I see it as a tool to be manipulated." Corval's forearms uncrossed as he leaned forward. "You speak as though strength is merely a technical problem to be solved." "Isn't it?" Maya asked simply. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Around them, the crowd of watching cadets had grown larger, with beings from across known space straining to hear the conversation. Zexthara could see Manthari psionics, Corbin berserkers, and even a few of the enigmatic shadow folk among the observers. Master Theclon made a sound that might have been amusement. "Perhaps a practical demonstration would be valuable after all, not for our benefit, but for the education of our other cadets." His compound eyes swept the assembled crowd. "Form a circle. Standard sparring protocols." The response was immediate. Cadets moved with practiced efficiency, creating a wide ring in the center of the training hall. Combat practice was always a popular spectacle at the academy, where beings could observe fighting techniques from across the galaxy. "The rules are simple," Theclon announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "Single combat, non-lethal engagement. Victory conditions are surrender, unconsciousness, or my determination that continued combat would result in serious injury." He looked directly at Maya. "Select your opponent." Zexthara expected the human to choose carefully, perhaps selecting one of the smaller cadets to minimize her disadvantage. Instead, Maya's gaze swept the circle once and fixed on a point directly across from her. "Him," she said, pointing to a figure that made several cadets step back involuntarily. Karthok was a Virian destroyer, standing nearly 3 meters tall and massing almost as much as a small shuttle. His species was bred for war, with bone plates that could deflect energy weapons and claws capable of tearing through starship hulls. He had arrived at the academy with a reputation earned through victories in the gladiatorial pits of his homeworld. The Virian looked down at Maya with what passed for confusion among his people. "Little human, I do not wish to harm you. Choose another. Maya stepped into the center of the circle, her movement casual but controlled. Master Theklon set the rules. Are you refusing to follow them? Karthok's massive head tilted slightly, and Zexthara could see the warrior's predatory instincts engaging despite his obvious reluctance. Virians were not a species that backed down from challenges, regardless of the circumstances. Very well, the giant rumbled, moving into the circle with surprising grace for his size. I will end this quickly. The contrast between the two combatants was almost comical. Karthok's smallest finger was larger than Maya's wrist, and his claws gleamed like metal in the hall's lighting. The human girl looked like a toy soldier facing down a siege engine. Begin, Master Theklon commanded. Karthok moved with the straightforward brutality of his species, a massive overhead strike intended to end the fight immediately. His claws whistled through the air with enough force to shatter stone, aimed directly at the spot where Maya stood. She wasn't there anymore. The girl had moved laterally at the last possible moment, not just evading the attack, but positioning herself inside Karthok's guard. What happened next was so fast that many of the observers missed it entirely. Maya's small fist struck the Virian's knee with surgical precision, targeting the narrow gap between his natural armor plates. The impact was followed immediately by a second strike to his wrist as his balance shifted, disrupting the massive warrior's ability to recover. Before Karthok could process what was happening, the tiny human had somehow maneuvered behind him. The Virian spun with impressive speed, but Maya was already moving again. She seemed to flow around his attacks like water, each movement economical and perfectly timed. When she struck, it was always at joints, pressure points, or the tiny vulnerable spots that existed even in the most heavily armored species. To the watching crowd, it looked like an elaborate dance where one partner was trying to crush the other while the second glided effortlessly through impossible spaces. Karthok's growing frustration was evident in his increasingly wild attacks, each one more desperate than the last. "She's not just evading," whispered Yelara, a Manthari psionics student whose species could perceive emotional auras. "She's analyzing him in real time, learning his patterns, finding weaknesses I can't even detect." The fight lasted exactly 3 minutes and 27 seconds. It ended when Maya, having systematically worn down her opponent through dozens of precise strikes, caught Karthok's massive arm during an overextended attack. Using his own momentum against him, she executed a throw that should have been physically impossible given their size difference. The 3-meter-tall Virian hit the training mat with enough force to rattle equipment on the far side of the hall. He lay still for a moment, not unconscious, but clearly stunned by the realization that he had been completely outclassed by someone who weighed less than one of his arms. Maya stood over him, not even breathing hard. When she spoke, her voice carried to every corner of the silent training hall. "Do you yield?" Karthok's response was a low rumble of what Zexthara recognized as genuine respect among the Virian people. "I yield, little warrior. You fight with the wisdom of ages." The silence that followed was broken by Master Theklon's clicking laugh. An excellent demonstration of the principle that victory belongs not to the strongest, but to the most adaptable. His compound eyes swept the assembled crowd. "Return to your training. All of you have much to learn." As the cadets dispersed, buzzing with excitement and speculation, Zexthara found himself staring at the small human who had just rewritten everything he thought he knew about combat. Maya was adjusting her uniform with the casual air of someone who had just completed a routine exercise. "How?" was all he managed to say. Maya looked up at him with those calm brown eyes. "You're thinking about this wrong, Commander. You see a small human facing a large alien, and you assume the alien has the advantage. But size and strength are just tools. The real question is who uses their tools more effectively. She paused, seeming to consider her words carefully. Humans learn to fight differently because we have to. We're not the strongest or fastest or most heavily armored species in the galaxy. But we've spent our entire evolutionary history fighting things bigger and more dangerous than us. We learn to survive by being smarter, more adaptable, and more willing to take calculated risks than anyone expects. As she walked away, heading toward the dormitory assignments office, Zexathera realized that the Academy was about to learn something new about warfare, something that would change how they thought about combat, strength, and the nature of victory itself. The tiny human was just getting started. 3 weeks after Maya's arrival at the Galactic Combat Academy, the standard training schedules had been quietly modified. Advanced classes that normally ran half-empty now had waiting lists, with cadets from across the galaxy hoping to observe the small human in action. What had started as curiosity had evolved into something approaching academic fascination. Captain Veltar of the Academy Security Division found herself reviewing incident reports that defied logical explanation. Equipment malfunctions in training rooms that Maya had used, sparring partners requiring medical attention despite the use of practice weapons. Most disturbing of all, several senior instructors had begun requesting reassignment rather than continue teaching classes that included the human. The breaking point came during advanced weapons training. Instructor Grelnock was a Tharkanian master, his species renowned throughout the galaxy for their expertise with edged weapons. His 6 arms could wield multiple blades simultaneously with a precision that bordered on art. He had trained champions, royal guards, and elite military units for over 60 standard years. Maya stood in the center of the weapons hall, surrounded by display cases containing implements of warfare from 1,000 different worlds. Energy blades that could cut through starship hulls, molecular maces that could shatter atomic bonds, plasma whips that burned at temperatures rivaling small stars. "Today we study the Zenthari battle staff," Grelnock announced, lifting a weapon that resembled a metallic serpent frozen in mid-strike. This weapon requires perfect balance and timing. The energy field generated by its core can only be controlled through precise manipulation of its resonance patterns. He demonstrated the basic forms, the staff becoming a blur of controlled energy as he moved through the traditional katas. Each movement was flawless, the weapon's plasma field creating intricate patterns in the air that spoke of decades of dedicated practice. "The staff chooses its wielder," he explained, offering the weapon to the first student. "Those who attempt to force their will upon it will find themselves burned by its power." Maya watched as student after student attempted the forms. Some managed basic movements before the staff's energy field became unstable. Others couldn't even lift the weapon without triggering its defensive systems. The Zenthari had designed their weapons to be an extension of the warrior's soul, requiring a spiritual connection that few could achieve. When Grelnock finally offered the staff to Maya, his expression was carefully neutral. The human girl examined the weapon with the same analytical calm she brought to every challenge, her fingers tracing the intricate patterns carved into its surface. "The Zenthari believe that weapons have spirits," Grelnock said. "They must be respected, understood, negotiated with. Force will only result in rejection." Maya hefted the staff experimentally, testing its weight and balance. What if they're right about the spirit part, but wrong about the negotiation? Before anyone could ask what she meant, the staff ignited. But instead of the controlled aura that Grelnock had demonstrated, the weapon erupted in a blaze of raw energy that sent cadets scrambling for cover. Warning alarms began blaring as safety systems detected power levels approaching dangerous thresholds. "Drop it!" Grelnock shouted, his 6 arms reaching for emergency controls. The containment field is failing! Maya didn't drop the weapon. Instead, she moved into the first form of the traditional kata, her movements precise despite the chaos of energy swirling around her. But her technique was wrong, according to everything Grelnock had ever learned about Zenthari combat arts. Where the masters taught flowing, graceful movements that worked with the staff's energy patterns, Maya fought the weapon directly. Her strikes were aggressive, demanding rather than requesting. She bent the plasma field to her will through pure determination, forcing it to conform to patterns that should have been impossible. The result was devastatingly effective. The staff became something new in her hands. Its energy field more focused and powerful than any of the watching instructors had ever seen. When she completed the kata, the weapon's glow dimmed to a stable aura that pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat. Impossible, whispered Zarath, a Zenthari cadet who had spent years trying to master his people's weapons. The staff is fighting her every moment, but somehow she's winning. Grelnock approached cautiously, his compound eyes studying both Maya and the weapon she held. Show me the third spiral. The third spiral was an advanced form that required perfect harmony between warrior and weapon. Most students needed years to achieve even a basic approximation of the movements. Maya's version bore only superficial resemblance to the traditional form. Where Zenthari masters flowed like water, she moved like controlled lightning. The staff screamed in protest as she forced it through patterns it was never designed to follow, but the raw power she generated far exceeded anything in the classical style. This isn't how the forms are meant to be performed, Grelnock said, but his tone carried fascination rather than criticism. Maybe that's the problem, Maya replied, spinning the staff in a complex pattern that sent controlled bursts of energy across the training floor. These weapons were designed by masters for masters, with techniques passed down through generations without change. But what if there are better ways to use them? She transitioned into a combat sequence that combined elements from half a dozen different martial traditions, the staff adapting to her will despite its obvious resistance. Humans don't have weapons like this on our world. We don't have the cultural baggage that comes with proper technique. When I look at this staff, I don't see a sacred artifact. I see a tool with specific capabilities that can be exploited. The demonstration continued for another 20 minutes, with Maya working through adaptations of classical forms that produced results far beyond their traditional effectiveness. By the time she finally powered down the staff, half the Academy's senior instructors had gathered to observe. Master Theclon emerged from the crowd, his ancient features thoughtful. Instructor Grelnock, how long does it typically take for a student to achieve basic proficiency with Zenthari weapons? For most species, 6 to 8 months of intensive training, Grelnock replied, still staring at the staff in Maya's hands. For the gifted few, perhaps 4 months. And this human has achieved what level of proficiency in her first attempt? The question hung in the air like an accusation. Finally, Grelnock spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. If I had to classify her technique according to our traditional standards, I would say she has achieved what we call warrior's mastery in a single session. The implications of his words rippled through the assembled crowd. Warrior's mastery typically required decades of dedicated study, representing a level of expertise achieved by fewer than 1% of those who studied Zenthari combat arts. Continue her training, Theclon commanded. I want to see what she does with weapons from other traditions. Over the following days, Maya was introduced to combat styles from across known space. Corbin fury fighting, where berserker warriors channeled pure rage into devastating attacks. Veltari shadow dancing, requiring supernatural speed and precision. The meditative combat forms of the crystal monks, based on mathematical principles so complex that most species couldn't even comprehend them. In each case, the result was the same. Maya would observe, analyze, and then demonstrate proficiency that exceeded most masters of the respective arts. But her versions of classical techniques bore only passing resemblance to their traditional forms. The Corbin instructor, a scarred veteran named Bloodclaw Thek, watched in amazement as Maya performed their sacred battle rage while remaining completely calm. "This should not be possible," he growled. "The fury must come from within. Without the rage, there is no strength." "The rage is inefficient," Maya explained matter-of-factly. "It provides a temporary boost in aggression and pain tolerance, but it reduces tactical thinking and wastes energy. The physical techniques are what matter. The emotional component is just cultural decoration." Her demonstration proved the point. Using pure technique, she achieved the same devastating results as a berserker warrior while maintaining complete tactical awareness and energy efficiency. The crystal monk observer, a being whose crystalline body rang like a bell when it moved, was equally disturbed. The mathematical forms require perfect mental discipline and spiritual harmony. They cannot be performed through mere physical motion. Maya's response was to execute a sequence so complex that the watching crowd couldn't follow its geometry, all while maintaining a running commentary on the mathematical principles involved. "The spatial relationships are based on optimal force vectors for humanoid biomechanics," she noted casually while destroying a series of practice targets. "The spiritual elements are just mental techniques for maintaining focus during complex calculations." By the end of her second month at the academy, Maya had progressed through training programs that typically required years to complete. More concerning to the faculty, she had begun developing her own fighting style that borrowed elements from dozens of different traditions while conforming to none of them. Captain Veltar found herself filing reports that read like fantasy fiction. A human child was systematically deconstructing martial arts that had evolved over millennia, stripping them down to their essential components and rebuilding them according to principles that no one else seemed to understand. The crisis came during an interdisciplinary combat exercise designed to test advanced students against multiple opponents using varied fighting styles. Maya faced a team of 7 cadets, each specialists in different forms of warfare. The Tharkanian Blade Master attacked first, his 6 arms weaving a net of cutting edges that should have been impossible to penetrate. Maya slipped through his defenses like smoke, her smaller size allowing her to move through gaps that wouldn't have existed for a larger opponent. Her counterstrike targeted nerve clusters that most species didn't even know existed. The Virian heavy assault specialist followed immediately, trying to use his massive strength to overwhelm her through sheer force. Maya didn't try to match his strength. Instead, she used his momentum against him, redirecting his attacks into his own teammates while staying just outside his reach. The Manthari psionics attempted to disorient her with mental interference, but Maya seemed to function perfectly despite the psychic assault. "Interesting," she commented while dodging a plasma burst. "Your telepathic techniques assume a certain type of brain structure. Human minds must work differently than you expected." One by one, her opponents fell, not through overwhelming force or superior speed, but through perfect tactical positioning, precise targeting of weaknesses, and an almost supernatural ability to predict and counter their attacks. When the exercise ended, 7 of the Academy's most promising advanced students lay defeated on the training floor, while Maya stood unmarked in the center of the ring. The silence that followed was broken by slow, deliberate applause. Admiral Kexvar, the Academy's commandant, stepped into the training area with an expression that mixed respect with something approaching concern. "Cadet Chen," he said formally, "report to my office immediately." As Maya followed the Admiral from the training hall, the assembled cadets and instructors were left to contemplate what they had witnessed. The small human hadn't just defeated 7 opponents. She had made it look effortless, as though the outcome had never been in doubt. In the Academy's central database, automatic systems updated training records and performance metrics. For the first time in the institution's 1,000-year history, a student's combat rating exceeded the maximum values programmed into the evaluation algorithms. The Academy's finest instructors began to realize that they weren't just witnessing exceptional talent. They were seeing the emergence of an entirely new approach to warfare, one that might render traditional combat doctrines obsolete. The tiny human was rewriting the rules of battle itself. Admiral Kexvar's office overlooked the Academy's central training complex, where thousands of beings from across the galaxy honed their martial skills. The view usually brought him satisfaction, a reminder of the institution he had spent decades building into the premier combat training facility in known space. Today, it only emphasized the magnitude of the problem sitting across from his desk. Maya Chen waited patiently in the oversized chair, her feet not quite reaching the floor. The contrast between her small human form and the massive furniture designed for larger species might have been amusing under different circumstances. Instead, it served as a stark reminder of how thoroughly she had upended every assumption about size, strength, and capability. "Your instructors are afraid of you," the Admiral said without preamble. His species, the Valderans, valued direct communication, and the current situation demanded absolute honesty. "In 3 months, you have achieved proficiency levels that we measure in decades. More concerning, you've demonstrated that many of our most revered combat traditions are inefficient." Maya tilted her head slightly. "Is efficiency a problem, sir?" The question was deceptively simple, but it cut to the heart of the crisis facing the Academy. For centuries, combat instruction had been built around the assumption that different species had evolved optimal fighting techniques suited to their physiology and psychology. The Zenthari had their flowing blade work, the Korban had their berserker rage, the Crystal Monks had their mathematical precision. Maya had proven that assumption wrong. Her hybrid approach, combining elements from dozens of traditions while discarding their cultural foundations, was demonstrably superior to any single traditional style. 3 senior instructors have requested transfers, Kexvar continued. Master Grelnock submitted a formal complaint claiming that you're somehow corrupting his weapons. And yesterday, Instructor Korval filed a report stating that continuing to teach you would violate his religious beliefs. The Admiral pulled up a holographic display showing Maya's training records. The progression curves were unlike anything in the Academy's database, climbing steadily beyond the theoretical maximum performance levels. "We need to understand what we're dealing with," he said. "Your species was admitted to the Galactic Alliance less than a century ago. Your homeworld is considered a minor agricultural planet with limited military significance. Yet you display combat capabilities that surpass our finest warriors." Maya was quiet for a long moment, her brown eyes studying the Admiral with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. When she spoke, her voice carried a weight that seemed far too mature for her apparent age. "With respect, sir, I think you're asking the wrong questions. You want to know how I can do what I do. But what you should be asking is why nobody else figured this out sooner." Before Kexvar could respond, his communications panel chimed with an urgent priority message. The holographic display that appeared made his face darken with concern. "Admiral," the image of Captain Veltar said urgently, "we have a situation. The hegemony has issued a challenge." The hegemony. Even the name sent ripples of unease through galactic civilization. They were the Academy's greatest rival, a military organization that claimed to represent the pinnacle of warrior achievement. Where the Academy taught diverse fighting styles from across the galaxy, the hegemony promoted their own martial philosophy based on absolute dominance and superior genetics. "What kind of challenge?" Kexvar asked, though he already suspected the answer. "Formal combat trials, 10 of their champions against 10 of our best graduates. Standard rules, but with full media coverage across the Alliance networks. Veltar's expression was grim. They're claiming that our mixed methods approach produces inferior warriors compared to their pure breeding and training programs. Maya leaned forward slightly. When? The Admiral looked at her with surprise. This doesn't concern you, Cadet. The challenge will be answered by our senior graduates, beings who have completed the full training program. Has anyone ever beaten hegemony champions in formal combat? Maya asked. The silence that followed was answer enough. The hegemony had issued similar challenges 3 times over the past century. Each time, their warriors had emerged victorious, demonstrating fighting techniques that seemed almost supernaturally effective. Their victories had led to decreased enrollment at the academy and growing doubts about traditional training methods. Their champions are genetically enhanced, Kexvar explained reluctantly, bred specifically for combat with physiology modifications that grant them advantages no natural species can match. They're faster, stronger, and more durable than any baseline warrior. Maya stood up from her chair, her small form somehow commanding attention despite her size. I volunteer to be the Academy's 10th champion. The suggestion was so absurd that Kexvar initially thought he had misheard her. Cadet, you haven't even completed basic training. The hegemony champions are seasoned warriors who have never known defeat. They would kill you in seconds. Maybe, Maya acknowledged, but you said it yourself. I've already surpassed most of your advanced graduates, and I have advantages they won't expect. Before the Admiral could refuse, another priority message appeared on his display. This one bore the seal of the Galactic Alliance Council itself. Admiral Kexvar, the Council's representative announced formally, the Alliance has accepted the hegemony's challenge on behalf of the Academy. The trials will commence in 72 hours. You will select 10 champions to represent not just your institution, but the diversity and cooperation that defines our civilization. The transmission ended, leaving Kexvar staring at options that ranged from bad to catastrophic. His best graduates were skilled, but they had never faced opponents like the hegemony champions. The political implications of defeat would be devastating, potentially leading to the Academy's closure and the validation of the hegemony's superiority doctrine. Sir, Maya said quietly, what do you have to lose? The trials were held on Nexus Station, a massive neutral facility that could accommodate representatives from hundreds of worlds. The central arena was designed to showcase combat between different species, with variable gravity, atmospheric composition, and terrain features that could be adjusted for optimal viewing. Maya stood with the other Academy champions in the preparation area, her presence drawing stares from beings who towered over her. She wore the same standard combat gear as the others, but on her small frame, it looked almost comical. Across the arena, the hegemony champions waited with predatory patience. Each was a masterpiece of genetic engineering and surgical enhancement. Enhanced muscle density, reinforced bone structures, modified nervous systems that processed information at superhuman speeds. They were living weapons crafted for a single purpose. The first 9 matches proceeded exactly as expected. Academy graduates who had trained for years were systematically destroyed by opponents who seemed to move in fast forward. Enhanced strength, impossible speed, and tactical programming that bordered on prescience combined to create a series of one-sided battles. By the time Maya's name was called, the Academy had suffered 9 decisive defeats. The gathered crowd of galactic dignitaries watched with a mixture of sympathy and embarrassment as the tiny human walked toward the arena floor. Her opponent was designated Champion Prime, the hegemony's most successful warrior. Standing nearly 4 meters tall, his enhanced physiology represented the absolute pinnacle of their breeding program. Weapon implants gleamed along his arms and spine, while subdermal armor plating made him effectively bulletproof. The contrast was so extreme that several observers began calling for the match to be canceled. A child facing a living war machine wasn't combat. It was execution. Maya reached the center of the arena and looked up at Champion Prime with the same analytical calm she had shown during her first day at the academy. When she spoke, her words carried clearly through the arena's acoustic systems. "You're an impressive piece of engineering," she said conversationally. "Perfect muscle distribution, optimized bone density, neural pathways enhanced for combat processing. Your creators did excellent work." Champion Prime's response was a sound like grinding metal. "Your words will not save you, little meat. The hegemony demonstrates the future of warrior evolution. You represent the past." The match began without ceremony. Champion Prime moved with the fluid perfection of a machine designed for killing, his enhanced speed turning him into a blur of controlled violence. His first attack should have ended the fight immediately. Maya wasn't there when he arrived. The tiny human had moved at the last possible instant, not just evading the attack, but positioning herself inside the enhanced warrior's guard. What happened next defied everything the watching crowd thought they knew about combat physics. Maya's strike targeted a point just below Champion Prime's ribcage, her small fist hitting with surgical precision. The impact shouldn't have been significant. The enhanced warrior's subdermal armor was designed to stop armor-piercing rounds, but something went wrong. The armor cracked along stress lines that hadn't existed moments before. Champion Prime staggered, confusion flickering across his features. He had never been hurt by such a small attack. His enhanced physiology should have absorbed the impact without effort. "Interesting," Maya commented, already moving again. "Your enhancements follow predictable patterns. Increased muscle density concentrated in primary movement groups. Neural pathway modifications focused on combat reflexes. But the improvements create vulnerabilities that natural physiology doesn't have." She flowed around his next attack like water, her movements impossibly smooth. Where Champion Prime relied on enhanced strength and speed, Maya used perfect positioning and timing. Every strike she landed was precisely targeted, hitting nerve clusters, joint intersections, and pressure points that shouldn't have existed in his modified anatomy. The enhanced warrior's attacks became increasingly desperate as he realized that his advantages weren't working. His superior reach meant nothing against an opponent who stayed inside his guard. His enhanced strength was useless when he couldn't connect with his target. His tactical programming, designed to counter known fighting styles, had no response to Maya's hybrid approach. "You think like a machine," Maya observed, ducking under a strike that would have decapitated her. "Your enhancements make you faster and stronger, but they also make you predictable. Natural warriors develop instincts, adaptability, the ability to respond to unexpected situations. You've been programmed for perfection, but perfection is just another word for limitation." She moved with fluid grace, her small size allowing her to attack from angles that Champion Prime's tactical systems couldn't anticipate. Each strike built upon the previous one, exploiting weaknesses that her analytical mind had identified in real time. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the impossible unfolded before their eyes. The tiny human was not just holding her own against the enhanced champion, she was winning. Systematically, methodically, inevitably winning. Champion Prime's defeat came not through a single devastating blow, but through the gradual accumulation of precise damage to systems that had been modified beyond their natural resilience. When he finally collapsed, his enhanced physiology simply couldn't compensate for the surgical precision of Maya's attack patterns. Maya stood over her fallen opponent, not even breathing hard. When she looked up at the assembled crowd of galactic dignitaries, her voice carried clearly through the arena's perfect acoustics. "This is what you need to understand about humans," she said, addressing not just the hegemony representatives but the entire watching galaxy. We're not the strongest species, or the fastest, or the most durable. We're not even particularly advanced compared to some of your civilizations. She gestured toward Champion Prime's motionless form. But we're adaptable. We learn. We take the best ideas from everyone we encounter and make them our own. And most importantly, we never accept that something is impossible just because no one has figured out how to do it yet. The arena erupted in chaos as delegates from a dozen species began shouting questions and demands for explanations. But Maya wasn't finished. Your hegemony champions represent genetic perfection within specific parameters, she continued, but perfection is static. It can't grow or change or adapt to new challenges. Humans represent something different, the potential for unlimited improvement through learning and adaptation. Admiral Kexvar watched from the observation deck as his youngest cadet redefined everything the galaxy thought it knew about warfare and human capability. The political implications would be staggering. The hegemony's doctrine of genetic superiority had been shattered by a child who proved that intelligence and adaptability could overcome any physical advantage. But beyond the politics and military applications, Maya's victory represented something even more significant. For the first time since humanity had joined the Galactic Alliance, the other species were forced to confront the possibility that these small, seemingly unremarkable beings might represent something unprecedented in galactic civilization. The tiny human hadn't just won a single combat. She had demonstrated that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology or their numbers, but their infinite capacity to exceed every limitation that others tried to place on them. As Maya walked out of the arena, leaving behind a legacy that would reshape galactic military doctrine for generations to come, one truth had become undeniably clear to every watching being. Humanity was just getting started.